welcome to Practice Intimacy. This is the place to be to learn all about love, sex, and how to have the best relationships you possibly can. My name is Jami Lynn. I'm a marriage and family therapist in the Austin area. And today, what I wanted to talk about is actually my practice and myself a little bit. I've had a couple of people reach out to me just asking for more details about who I am and what I do, and I figured it would be a great time to do that. So let's get started. I am Jami Lynn Beulah. I am a therapist, and I work primarily with couples and folks who want to get into a relationship. Though I actually think about the relationship and sexuality side of my practice being underneath a larger umbrella, most of my training was actually in trauma recovery therapy. And I think that is like my primary stance as a therapist. Most of what I'm doing with any client is trauma recovery because all of us are experiencing trauma. Sometimes we don't even know it. What I'm talking about in terms of we don't even know it is that we are communal creatures. We are built to be in community for most of the history of our species. We have lived in really close-knit communities, often in households where our entire family lives with us. And that separation that we all now experience is one of the big reasons why so many people experience anxiety, depression, and yet we don't often talk about that. So anyway, that was kind of a tangent. I am primarily a trauma recovery specialist, and what that means is I work with both developmental trauma and shock trauma. Developmental trauma are all those little moments whenever we're young where we experience ourselves as not good enough, where we experience shaming, where we experience disconnection from the people that we're meant to be connected to. And that has a serious effect on our psyche. If you're interested in this, check out anything to do with attachment theory. There is an excellent book. The author, I cannot remember their name right now, but the book is called Attached. And that is a great introduction into the subject of what happens whenever you have early developmental trauma and how that's going to affect your future relationships. Shock trauma is what we often think about whenever we hear the word trauma. A serious car accident, witnessing someone you care about either in a threat situation or losing their life, experiencing a moment where you almost lose your life, having any kind of assault in your history or physical violence in your history or sexual violence in your history. That's all shock trauma. And then complex trauma is whenever you have a combination of these things all mixed together in your history, where you have developmental trauma and shock trauma, or you have multiple events of shock trauma that all have similar threads to them and really just leave you feeling as though the world is an unsafe place. And my job as a therapist often is to help people make sense of their past so that their reactions today are no longer causing them the same pain and terror. If you process the terrifying things or the painful things or the shameful things that have happened in your history, then today, whenever those feelings crop up, it's not as though they're coming out of nowhere. Instead, you have the memory integration to be able to say, oh, right, this thing happened to me. I feel that there's a part of me being triggered because of whatever's going on in the present day, but that horrible thing that happened to me back then, it's not happening right now. So I don't need to. It's not that I don't need, it's just that our body doesn't have to scream and shout at us to tell us you're in danger, because we can separate out what happened back then versus what's happening now. And so that's my primary leaning as a therapist. All of the training that I have done, or at least the majority of training I have done, as well as the supervisor that I ended up doing my mentorship hours with. So that's 3 years where you have to work under a mentor after you graduate with your master's. She is an excellent trauma recovery therapist. And so most of my training is in that. And let me just share some of the bigger training models that I use, because this is actually really interesting for a lot of people. And you can find therapists who are similar in the way that I work by looking for people in these different models. One is IFS, Internal Family Systems. This is often called parts work model, where Basically, the person who created it, Dick Schwartz, he listened to his clients and recognized that people were talking about themselves as multiple different parts, which actually really makes sense whenever you start learning more about neuroscience. No human being is homogenous. You don't have the same state of being everywhere you go. You have different states of being depending on what you're doing. You're a different person at work versus when you're scared to death because a car just pulled into your lane versus when you're at home with your partner wanting to be tender or sexy with them. These are all different parts of you. And IFS really is just a way to begin speaking about that more overtly and actually to begin interacting with the different parts of you so that you can get to know yourself on a deeper level. IFS is one of my favorite models. If you are interested in finding a therapist who has that training, check out the link below. This link will take you to anybody who's been through at least the level 1 training, which is really helpful if you want to find a person who's skilled at this model because there's lots of components to it. So check out that link if you're looking for a therapist who would be good at doing this parts work. The next model that I'm really aligned with is called interpersonal neurobiology, IPNB psychotherapy for short. This one's created by Dan Siegel. It's not something you can necessarily get trained in. Dan just has lots and lots of content out in the world. My favorite, I have 2 favorites, but one of them is an audio. It's called The Neurobiology of We. It is fantastic. And then the other one is a book, Mindsight. I love that book. And then if you're a parent, he has some of the best books on parenting I've ever read in my life. One of them is The Whole Brain Child. It is fabulous. And basically, interpersonal neurobiology is a model that leads a person through 9 different levels of brain integration. And the idea is we have to have the lower levels. Well, okay, it's not a hierarchy. We need them all. But if you think about it, we have to stack our ability to watch ourselves and be well integrated in our mind. And the very bottom, the foundational practice is integration of consciousness, which is just being able to watch your own mind and see what's happening rather than what a lot of us actually do, which is be on autopilot and just feel and act. I feel something and then I do something. Rather than I feel something, I can reflect on what I'm feeling. I know my own history and I can make sense of why I'm feeling whatever it is I'm feeling in a certain situation. And then as you get higher and higher up these different levels of integration, I can create a story around my history and what I'm feeling. I can communicate that to other people. I can share all of this with my partner in this case, because I'm always interested in the relationships. And then eventually his last level is really a state of enlightenment. He calls it transpiration. It's the ability to breathe across all the different levels of integration, but really in the terms that most of us would understand it, it's enlightenment, where you move through the world with compassion and curiosity and openness, and you're in a flow state with the rest of existence. The last model that I have quite a bit of training and a lot of alignment with is actually a couples model. It's called Relational Life Therapy. I've talked about it on this channel many times before. If you're interested in it, check out either the 5 winning strategies in relationship or the 5 losing strategies in relationship. Those are both concepts from relational life therapy, and they are so helpful if you are in a romantic partnership. The reason I love relational life therapy is actually grounded in feminist psychotherapy. So the creator of this one, his name is Terry Real. His mentor was a feminist therapist in, I guess, the 60s and 70s, probably. I don't actually know whenever she was working, and I cannot remember her name at the moment, but it might come to me. That was his mentor, and she really taught him that if you're going to work with relationships, you need to recognize that for hundreds of years in this culture, I live in the United States, there are other cultures that are very similar to this one, some that are worse. If you live in this culture, then you live in patriarchy, and relationships are always going to have a power dynamic that needs to be addressed, where often, and although this is changing some, but often the partner who has less of a voice is the female partner or the feminine partner in the relationship, and the one who has more of the voice, more of the power, is the masculine person in the relationship. And so the foundational concept in this particular model, relational life therapy, is to begin to bring equal power to both people and to not exalt masculine qualities over the feminine qualities of like nurturance, care, softness, gentleness, and instead really hold them equally and help our clients do the same thing. So that's all of the education side of my work. There are other things that I'm trained in, particularly like somatic experiencing, which has more to do with bringing the body into the room, really focusing on the body to release trauma experiences. But when it comes to theory of mind and also theory of how to be in relationship, for me, the big ones are internal family systems, interpersonal neurobiology, and relational life therapy, all of which I will link below. Again, with relational life therapy, there is a directory, and I'll link the directory so that if you're looking for a couples therapist who's trained in a great model, they are available to you. Just look on that directory. Now, as for me, a little bit about myself. I'm going to talk about the therapy side first, and then I'll talk about me. But when it comes to therapy, I have known that I have wanted to do this job for decades. When I was around 8 years old, I watched the movie Good Will Hunting, and the scene where Robin Williams is telling, his name's Will in the movie, but Matt Damon, it's not your fault, it's not your fault. And there's this really cathartic moment, and Matt Damon is crying and he storms out of the room. Oh my God, I was in love. I was like, I need to do this job. I can't not do this job. I will do it. Absolutely. No doubt. And I wasn't sure whenever I was young exactly what route to take. I was thinking psychiatry, which would have been awesome. I kind of think I would have been great at that. But as a female, I was encouraged to go more the therapy route rather than the medical route. Patriarchy, don't like it. But I love my job. What I do is amazing. Working with clients is my favorite thing in the world. And I was lucky enough that when I was in high school, I had the opportunity to do an internship, and I worked with a woman here in town in Austin named Holly Lawson. She was a couples and sexuality therapist, which when I learned that I could specialize in relationship and sex, I was done. I knew that that is exactly what I wanted to work with in this field. It's the thing that I have struggled with in my own life. I've always had big questions about how to be in relationship well, how to have an exciting and passionate sex life, even as you're in a relationship for a long time. And it's something that I never get tired of reading about, talking about, practicing in my own life. And so I knew whenever I discovered that that was a specialty, that that would be what I would do, sexuality and relationship. And then as for me as a person, I would say, and I think I've shared this before, but I would say that the things that I am most interested in my life are, number one, intimacy, how to live an intimate life where as you move through the world, you experience beauty, joy, ecstasy, turn on, compassion, just the sense of aliveness that is possible when you move through the world, experiencing yourself as valuable and experiencing all of life as valuable. And so that is actually my mission, is to help people experience that. And I'm a big old intimacy nerd. But the other things I'm kind of nerdy about are neuroscience. I love learning about the brain and the whole nervous system, because our brain is not separate from the rest of us. Our whole body, this whole entire organism, is actually our nervous system. And so in addition to neuroscience, I also have interest in more of the body sciences. So somatic experiencing would be an example of that, but also just movement. So in my life, I typically do weightlifting and yoga, and then of course like walks and swimming and hiking and things like that just for fun, but how to incorporate movement into the healing process. Because if our brain and body are connected, and this whole organism works to influence our emotional state and our ability to be in relationship well, then how do you use the body? How do you use this part of our mechanics to affect this part in a positive way? A few other things to know about me is I have always been in open relationships since I first started dating at the age of 19. And I do work with people who are in open relationships. It's actually really fun work for me, but the majority of my couples are monogamous. And I have a stance towards monogamy versus non-monogamy, which says choose whatever works for you. Just communicate well with your partner, be open and honest, listen to yourself, and if something changes and you need to shift, know that you can do that. Monogamy and non-monogamy is actually a spectrum. Most of us tend to fall in the middle. There are actually very few people who are outliers where they're totally monogamous and they love it, or they're totally open and they love it. Most of us are somewhere in the middle. And we make choices based on what we think is best going to serve us in our life. And for me, I chose non-monogamy partly because I'm pansexual and having partners of only one gender would be sad, but also because I am a relationship fanatic and I want to learn about relationship. That doesn't mean I don't enjoy having a primary partner. I do. I love having that long-term committed experience. And I also like meeting new people and seeing what that's like. And so some of the future videos will probably touch on non-monogamy as well, because I have experience as well as lots of knowledge from reading, talking to, learning about what to do in non-monogamy. What you can expect in the next few weeks are very basic relationship videos. Recently, I had a client come in who experienced a relationship from the time they were in their undergrad, so like 18 years old, until the time they were in their mid-30s. And that is the only relationship they've had. Which I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but in this particular case, this person has experienced very little growth from the time they were 18 and in relationship. It felt as though they haven't really matured in their relationship. And so I agreed to make a few videos where I will talk about what it looks like to have a committed relationship that is really based on being a mature and loving partner. So look forward to that in the upcoming weeks. And I will see you next time.